Welcome to episode 103 of Eat, Drink, Write, an Urban Fantasy Whiteboard.
Rude. Bodes well.
Oh boy. And today we're going to be talking more about trauma.
Yes.
We did do an episode on childhood trauma before, but I forgot
Yeah.
to look up what number that was, and how that might affect our villains and our main characters. But we thought we'd talk more about traumas in general. But before we get into that, how was your week?
Long. I think all of them are going to be long. I've got a little bit more than 2 months before I graduate. So that's a little stressful.
Yeah.
And I'm working my butt off. So all of that. We did get to go and see you guys for a little mini vacation in Helen. So that was fun.
That was fun.
So mostly overall pretty good, like just busy, as usual. So what about yours?
Tired. Trying to get ready for court. Got my list of cases for my next court date.
And you were sick last week, so that was also fun.
Yeah. Went up. One of the reasons we went on vacation was so I could get my booth back up to date up there where I sell, I've got Dragon Craft Creations and on Etsy. And I actually have a booth up in Helen that I put my stuff in. So I had to work on getting my product. I hadn't been up there since Halloween. So I had to
been a minute.
Make my necklaces and my bracelets and all that stuff and restock. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And now I'm trying to do my child support stuff.
Yeah.
What are you eating and drinking?
I'm not eating anything yet. I think I'm going to end up making chili cheese omelets though, after we're done here, with that chili that you made for the Super Bowl. So,
nice. Okay.
It's a little, it's oldish, but it'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
I can.
If you've got your dad's stomach, you'll be fine.
I don't know that I do, but it's whatever. It's fine. But I'm drinking a mango chili margarita style Truly.
Never heard of that one.
It's very good. It's nice.
Neat.
So I highly recommend.
I am not eating yet. I think your dad's going to make waffles, he said tonight.
Oh, yum.
Sounds lovely. And I'm drinking a La Croix. I didn't feel like drinking. I'm tired. I want to be able to make it through this podcast so that people will be able to hear me instead of snoring. They'll be able to actually listen to things about trauma.
Fair enough.
So I should probably be drinking something with caffeine, but I'm not.
Well, that's fine.
Anyway, sorry about the delay for this. I was sick. It was a stomach thing. It wasn't COVID or anything. And so that wasn't fun. So that's why we're late. But now we're late again because of all this other stuff. So
yeah,
we're struggling. We apologize.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't help that I can't help you too much on the podcast side of things because I'm so busy these days, and I'm working 10-hour days, and you're busy too, and it's not a fun period of time at the moment. But
yeah, usually this time of year is slow for me. It's just not a lot going on, but for some reason it's just been go 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 go. So it has been a little difficult. We're gonna try to get back on track, get down to a time schedule. I think you've got a handle now on what you have to do to get to where you want to be graduation wise. So I think we'll be able to work this in. So
I think so.
Okay. So I think it's important to think about the traumas that our characters face and how to write a valid, believable reaction to them.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, we're sadists when it comes to our characters. So
you're not wrong.
We put them through a lot of trauma. And so it would be good to know how they should react to that.
Yeah, definitely. I am really glad that you suggested doing these types of episodes in general, just trauma response episodes. I think I've definitely read books where, insanely traumatic things happen to the main character, but afterwards they're like, after the events resolved-ish, the character never really thinks about it again or deals with any potential consequences or have trauma responses. And so I think it's definitely something to keep in mind to keep your world realistic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our heroes are heroes, but if you want it to be realistic without, them being, too good to be true type thing, you've got to be able to write effectively. Now we have a book that both of us have from Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi. They write these whole series of writer thesauruses.
Thesaurusi.
Thesaurusi.
I think that's wrong.
I think
just
that's
was
wrong
playing with
too.
it. I was just playing with the words. I'm an author.
We can do that. But they are amazing. And actually, they've just come out with a new one, but I don't remember what the title of that one is.
Oh,
I haven't gotten it yet. I'm going to get it very soon.
Is it the conflict one?
I don't remember.
I don't either. But you're right. They do have a new one. They're still coming out with books.
Thank the Lord, because I've been waiting for the next one. I have all of them. So I'm very excited. There's a new one, which I don't have yet. But anyway, they have written a book that I used a little bit for this episode called Trauma, the Emotional Wound Thesaurus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, just you've already said it, but they're super great books. We highly recommend them. They have several different kinds, from like the rural setting thesaurus to other ones, urban settings,
all kinds of stuff. Every one of them is great, and they break them down well, and they explain them well. And I listed the things that they talk about, but they go into whole chapters and paragraphs and on each of those things, plus more. Of course, I couldn't do all of it in this.
No, of course. And honestly, I think it's worth it to support their books. Like they do such a great job.
Mm-hmm, they do. So go buy those if you haven't. So there's three things, well, probably more, but three things that I was thinking about when I was doing these notes about writing trauma. Like, how do you write the traumatic events themselves? And should you? I mean, and how to, which we've done. What was that episode we did on like events, heavy scenes or something?
Oh, oh no, this is not a good night for either one of us. I do vaguely know what you're talking about. Like writing sad scenes or writing a heavily emotional scene or something like that.
Trauma probably is going to be, but this is a little bit different than what we've written before.
Yeah. So, and back to what you said, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But to what you said, should you write those events? I think that's a great question, because some of them are obviously they're traumatic for a reason. And so, you just want to keep your audience in mind. Like, your character may go through this event, but is it absolutely necessary for your audience to see it? Like, can we learn about it through the novel? Can we reveal it slowly, or can we fade to black when it's about to happen? Something,
that makes me think of the Patricia Briggs, was it book number 2?
Yeah, three,
book number 3. And Riley, I mean, she's old enough now, but she wanted to start reading those books. And you and I talked about whether she should read book 3, because there is a scene in it that is extremely traumatic. And I decided that it was fine, and that I would use that as an opportunity to talk to her about the trauma that was faced in that book. But
absolutely.
Keep your audience in mind. If it's a young adult book, think about how you're going to deal with that kind of thing.
Exactly.
You've got to consider how this trauma is going to affect your characters, your character arcs, your storyline, your plot. It's not just going to happen and then, like you said, oh, they've moved on to the next thing. It's gonna last.
Right.
And when does this event take place? Is it childhood, like we did a childhood trauma episode? Was it in the past before the book started? Does it happen during the book?
Right.
How is it that you want this traumatic event to unfold? And think about why. Are you doing it just for shock value? Because that may not be what you need to do. We've always said it needs to have a reason to be in there.
Right. Always consider the purpose.
Yeah. So what is trauma? It's a negative experience or experiences that cause pain. Traumas can be emotional or physical.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's super important to remember.
Yeah, because I don't know. Well, I list some, like the loss of a leg in a car accident is physical and emotional.
Right.
The loss of a loved one isn't necessarily physical, although there can be physical consequences to grief.
Right. Right.
And it's a hurt that lasts. You don't just move on to the next scene.
Right. I like the way that you put that because, I think that's just something to keep in mind. Not every wound or, a fall or a breakup or whatever is going to affect your character traumatically. Like not everything is inherently traumatic. But some things definitely are. And I think it's, the lingering pain can help you to define that for your character.
Right. I mean, and it may be traumatic at the time, like a breakup.
Right. Yeah.
But it's not necessarily going to be a lasting trauma, but it still has its own set of effects that happen to it. A teenager who has their first horrible breakup from their first love is super traumatic at the time, but by the time they're 40 and they're married and have 5 kids or whatever it is,
right.
It helped them grow. Wow. Helped them grow at the time. But when you're writing, if you're writing a young adult, then that is going to be a huge trauma. If you're writing the 40-year-old character, that's not even going to be a trauma that probably comes up on his radar in the scene that you're in the book that you're writing.
Right. Yeah.
So physical traumas are like injuries, car accident, work accident, an injury that causes infertility, like in the show. Oh boy, this is going to be a rough episode. The show that everybody always talks about, that the United States got taken over and the girls have to wear the red. And
Handmaid's Tale.
Handmaid's Tale.
This is like a game that you and I get to play while we podcast.
It really is. This is terrible tonight. But how one of the main character people got shot, and that caused her to not be able to have children, which then led to, she founded that whole society based on her desire. I mean, partly she wanted children.
Right.
And so that trauma, being shot and losing her uterus or whatever it was that affected her, had massive consequences to everything in that book.
Right.
An injury could be from a fight.
True.
Other accidents, like, you fall down the stairs and break your toes, although breaking your toes is not that super traumatic.
I feel like I would have slight fear of stairs from then on.
I do hold on very tightly to the railing when I go up and down the stairs now.
Yeah.
Weather related, like think tornadoes and things blowing around and falling on your car, like a branch coming through your house and landing on the bed, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Physical pain, like physical trauma. Well, injuries are physical trauma too, but I'm talking about physical versus emotional.
Right. Right.
So things like a miscarriage, which isn't an injury that happened, no one else. Well, I suppose they could have, but miscarriage, losing your sight, people who have glaucoma, or, something that happens, losing a limb, of course, losing your hearing. That happens to people all the time.
Right.
A gunshot wound, being burned. That makes me think of those people. There was that person who was going around throwing acid on people's faces. You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Torture's a big one, which, that can happen to our armed forces when they're captured and tortured for information. It can happen by psychopaths who like to torture people. There's all kinds of lovely people out there. That's the Criminal Minds thing coming back out again. I'm done with that series finally. Emotional trauma, like a terrorist attack. You might not be physically harmed, but that fear, that trauma, 9/11.
I was about to say, just think of us as the US as a country, like the way that we've reacted to 9/11 is 100% a trauma response to a terrorist attack.
I mean, I remember when that happened. You were young, you were in elementary school, but I was actually at your school the day that happened. And it was traumatic. I remember how shocked we all were. We didn't know what to do. It was like we were milling about, not knowing how to react.
Well, it was so interesting because like even the next year, I was in third grade when it happened. And the next year when it was 9/11, this girl was in my class and we were just sitting there. And so I'm in fourth grade at this point. So I was like 9 years old. And this girl just burst into tears that morning. And the teacher was like, what's going on? And her dad was getting on a plane that morning.
Ugh.
Yeah. And so she was just scared because, of
Yeah.
course, like, a year ago, this thing happened. And then we're remembering it on the day of
Yeah.
a year later. And it's obviously going to be very terrifying. So,
Yeah.
The responses are just, like you said, long lasting pain that comes from these things.
Things can trigger a memory of that, like her dad getting on the plane.
Right.
But it could happen years later. So it could be that 40-year-old man that we're writing about had something happen in his childhood that does get triggered by something that's going on in your book right now.
Right.
So that might be one way how this trauma is going to come into play in your book.
Yeah. Yeah.
But being kidnapped, the death of a loved one, your spouse, your family, your child, heaven forbid, friend, parent, family, and I think I said family already. Having a stalker, that happens. And not, having the police tell you we can't do anything until something happens. Well, by then you're possibly dead.
Right.
That is traumatic. Witnessing something horrific.
Definitely.
I remember when I was a kid, I witnessed a little kid getting hit by a car.
Yeah.
That's horrifying.
Yeah.
Rape, betrayal, divorce. Rape is also physical, but there is a huge emotional impact trauma with that.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, I think based on your examples here, like it is pretty obvious that an event isn't limited to just one type of trauma. I think an event can lead to both for sure.
And that kind of brings me to PTSD. It's a real thing. And so I wanted to go ahead and talk about it because our characters might have PTSD, and you need to know, and you'll probably want to research, how does it work? What is the treatment? What are the symptoms? That kind of thing. So
right. Yeah.
PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's a mental disorder that you can develop after exposure to a traumatic event, like the ones we listed above.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And, there are lots of books and movies, and I mean, honestly, any type of media that's out there that have shown PTSD. Think of The Walking Dead and, that kind of thing. And some of them have shown it extremely well. And you mentioned Mercy Thompson earlier, the Patricia Briggs series. And I think that she wrote Mercy's PTSD extremely well because it's so, like, Mercy obviously is healing, and I'm not going to give too many spoilers for those of you who might not have read it, but is still healing, but she heals throughout the series and not just in one quick thing and then it's done. Because
she continually, Patricia Briggs is a sadist like all of us authors, and continually throws Mercy into trauma like you would not believe.
Right.
But her healing does take time, and it does still come up books later. Yeah. And she does it. You're right. She does an excellent job of weaving that whole healing process and having reactions and things happen.
Yes, I think that's one of my favorite things about the Patricia Briggs novels is that she is very good at keeping it relevant, in books later. Like, and Mercy doesn't necessarily think about her traumatic events all the time or whatever, but if something reminds her of it, she'll think a sentence about it and then be like, oh, that was,
or have a physical reaction.
Right. Exactly.
Where we as the reader are like, oh, I know why she's doing that. I understand why her palms are sweating. I get it.
Exactly.
And the symptoms might include disturbing thoughts, disturbing feelings, dreams. They might have nightmares. They could have attempts to avoid situations because like you said, I'm never going to go downstairs again because I fell. I'm going to have to use an elevator from
Yeah.
now on, or never using
Right.
an elevator because, whatever.
Right.
But it all comes down to the way that your particular character thinks and feels.
Right.
So think about your character, because Mercy is not going to handle trauma the same way I handled. I would be in a mental institution if I went through what she went through.
Sure.
But she is strong, and yes, she's got PTSD, but people handle stressors differently,
very differently. And I think that's an extremely important point, is not everyone is going to handle things the same way. Trauma looks different for everybody.
I like that you put it that way.
Yeah.
So it is probably the symptoms that you're going to be having to write when you're talking about trauma, because that's how it's going to come out in your character.
Right.
I did find out that 7 to 8% of the population will have PTSD at some point in their lives. That's
wow.
crazy.
That's a big number.
And it affects twice as many women as it does men, according to, I got this from Wikipedia.
Oh, okay.
10% of women as opposed to 4% men.
Weird. I wonder why.
I don't know.
I wonder what their sample size was and stuff. That's the scientist in me, though. So,
and is it just, when they asked these questions, did men admit it?
Right. Yeah. Fair.
I mean,
no, that's a good point. I think
trained by our society, it's not manly to, react a certain way. And so they might not have been honest in this survey or whatever.
Yeah,
experiment.
Definitely. Yeah. I think I would definitely have to know how the study was done.
And then consequences of PTSD might show itself in drug use or alcohol use, eating disorders, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts and actions. A really great movie that handled PTSD was Copycat with Sigourney Weaver. It's a really old one. It's like 1985 movie.
That's a great movie, though.
It was a really good movie. And she was the main character, and she was a psychiatrist who specialized in serial killers. And so she was testifying at this trial of the serial killer, and he attacked her and almost killed her. She almost died. And so her PTSD had manifested itself as agoraphobia, where she could not leave her home. And it was crippling. And the storyline is, so that particular book was trauma at it. That was the whole core of that book. The whole plot line revolved around her trauma and her, the consequence of that trauma and how she handled, and then what happened in the plot line of the current time was excellent.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen that one. I need to watch that one again.
Yeah, that was a good one. I just remember thinking that is the perfect example of PTSD, this traumatic event really having a consequence that affects, using it in a, well, it wasn't a book, but using it in, well, I don't know, maybe it was a book, but I saw the movie. If I could just finish a sentence, it would be great. But yeah, that was an excellent example of seeing how it can be written into a plot line, into a book.
Definitely. You mentioned earlier, like using nightmares as a symptom of PTSD. Do you remember, you watched Black Sails, right?
Do
you remember when the captain's, I don't remember his name anymore, but his wife died, and the dreams that he had after that were so interesting, because I feel like that's important, because I don't think, dreams that come with PTSD are just going to be reliving the event. It's going to be, they're going to be very strange interpretations of the traumatic event that you went through. I think it's super interesting to think about, and something probably to research if you plan on using dreams as a symptom.
We should probably do an episode on dreams. Did we do an episode on dream sequences?
I don't know.
I don't either, but if we haven't, we should. I feel like we might have though.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some tips for writing these traumatic moments? And I got this from the website writewellsellwell.com. And it was a really good article. And
tried saying that 10 times fast,
I know, right? When traumatic events happen, it's really hard for the human brain to comprehend in that moment the entire
Yeah.
scope of what's happening.
Right.
So this tip was to write small, not big. Don't try to write the whole terrifying scene like an explosion, but rather the small parts that your character sees at the time.
Absolutely. I have actually heard that before. And it's, there was one, I'm sure you have examples coming up. There was one article that I was reading about a guy who had gone off to war, and there was a suicide bomber in the city that he was in. And he just remembers seeing burnt children's socks like on the ground. Yeah. And so like that was like that small detail that he remembered specifically, and that's just something that stuck with him.
Oh,
so
that's awful.
It sure is. Well, sorry to be a downer, y'all, but I think it reiterates the point of like focus on small details.
Yeah, I think so. The finer details will give the reader bite-sized amounts to handle instead of this huge overwhelming scene also.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also a great way to show character traits and a realistic way to show how real life works. When I was rear-ended in a car accident, I was pregnant with you.
Yeah.
And it was so strange. I don't remember everything that happened. I remember the smell of rain because it was raining, and that was part of why she rear-ended me. And it did seem like slow motion because I could see it coming in my rear view mirror. I knew it was coming, and there was nothing I could do about it because there was a car in front of me, and my hands were gripping the steering wheel as I braced for it. I wasn't noticing the car in front of me. I wasn't noticing that we were at a street light or what was going on anywhere else. My view was very limited, even though this major thing affected a whole bunch of people. My view was very limited of it.
Right.
So yeah,
for sure. I love the tip. I just love it. I think these strange little things, tend to stick in people's minds, like the smell of the rain that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I've read some great books using this tip. There was one, and I can't remember the title of it or even like really the premise. It's been a super long time since I read it, but the main character had a trauma event where there was dripping blood, and so she remembers the sound of the dripping blood. And so every now and then in the present, as she was going through whatever the plot line of the story was, when she would remember that traumatic event, the author would use onomatopoeia of the drip, drip, drip,
mm-hmm.
To take the character and the audience back to that traumatic event.
Mm-hmm.
Because, at that point, the author didn't have to say she's thinking about this traumatic event. All she had to do was say drip, 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 and we were all right there with her.
That gives me chills. That's awesome.
And I wish I remembered what series that was, because it was a great use of that. And maybe I'll try to find it, but it's such a very small detail, so it might be difficult. But maybe one of you guys knows. I don't know. But it was a very good way to get across a lot of information to your audience that the main character was going through.
That's awesome. You also can connect it to a memory. The mind has this crazy way of interpreting moments in life, and you can add to the chaos of the event by showing the brain doing something unexpected, like you said, that the children's socks, the burned socks. That is such an unusual. You don't expect that. You expect, the smoke and the but he saw those socks, and that is true. That's true what your brain does.
Right.
And it could even be doing that to connect to a childhood memory of some kind, like when you burned your hand on the stove, this fire that you're experiencing might bring you back.
I did do that.
Yeah. Well, Grandpa, my dad spanked Courtney's hand because she kept wanting to touch the hot eye. At least, I don't think that he was there to spank you for that, but
no, I was a stupid little child. And it was hot, and you told me it was hot, and I was like, is it? And then I slapped my whole hand on it, and I was like, that's pretty hot. Burst into tears and
screamed your head off.
Sure did. I have always been, a curious human, and now I'm a scientist.
It makes sense. Speaking of the senses, like the smell of the rain that I smelled,
Yeah.
usually in an event, when it's happening that fast, you don't notice all five senses. When I was in the car accident, I'm sure that there were sounds and all kinds of things that I just didn't notice. I remember the rain.
Right.
But generally we always say use all five senses. That's a great idea to get detail and stuff across, but maybe not in a traumatic event. Like,
Sure.
you always see it on TV shows where an explosion goes off and they can't hear. You hear the mumbled sound.
Yeah.
That hearing sense is gone, but they're seeing these things.
Right.
Or, you pick a sense and explore that and see what you can do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that's a really good idea. Kind of like being dunked underwater, like see what else is there,
Mhm.
Can you see anything? Can you taste anything? I feel like taste gets left out a lot.
I think so. But the taste of blood might not be a bad detail
Right.
in a particular traumatic event. And
Absolutely.
that taste might be the one sense that you're going to want to accentuate, which can then come in later. The taste of the copper taste, it can come in later to bring us back to the trauma.
Definitely.
Less is more. If you need to describe a fiery crash on the freeway from the point of view of your character, give it in like short bursts that someone might see, because they aren't watching it like a movie detached. You're in
Right.
it. So you're looking for your phone, or you don't know how, you don't react. Your body can't see it like a movie.
Well, it makes me think of when Jordan and Darius got in their car accident, and they had their dog with them, Ariel. And so these people stopped to see if they were okay, and Jordan was like, "Is my dog okay? Is my dog okay?" And the dude's like, I don't really care about your dog. Are you good? Like, are you okay? And she's like, but my dog. So she wasn't paying attention to any scratches
Anything
she
else.
had, if the
Yeah.
car was okay, what this dude was actually saying to her. She was focused on my
On her
dog, my
dog.
dog.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You might see like the very top of a fireball or light bouncing off the side of a semi. It's going to be these odd little things that I think give your book and this traumatic event that you're writing depth.
Right.
The ground shaking underneath the floorboard of the car, find small moments and let the reader fill in the blanks. As
Right.
That's also a tip that we often hear. Let your readers, fill in the blanks.
Yeah, definitely.
Then I found another site called lisahallwilson.com, and it's all one word. And she had another really good article that, we think about fight or flight, and she had a really good way of talking about this. She said, past trauma has four main lasting reactions: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Huh.
Most people have heard of the fight or flight. That's where you either try to get away or you come out fighting. And she says, fighting doesn't necessarily mean fists. It might come out as being angry, where you yell. That's your reaction, is that you're, think about how parents, you see them on TV yelling at their kids. And it's not because, it's because of the trauma of the event. They're scared for their child. And so that's their fight reaction.
Right.
Freeze looks like you freeze, you go numb, you are in denial, you stand there, kind of like when we were milling about at 9/11. It was this, what's happening, you're in denial, you feel tired, you feel a disassociation with what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
Our brain has this incredible ability to escape the trauma on the outside by going inside. And
Well,
then,
and it's nowhere near like a trauma response or whatever, but just like the fear response of when I was in Alaska, I discovered that I have an intense fear of heights, which is, a great place to discover that. It's wonderful.
On the mountain.
Yeah, I was, on the mountainside, and I had never had a fear response where I literally just froze. it's not necessarily the trauma response, but like more like the immediate fear response, I guess, which is, also going to be part of a traumatic event, I guess, if you end up riding one of those. But I was on the side of a mountain, was supposed to be climbing up it, looked over to the side. There's no side,
Yeah.
there was not a side, there was a drop, and I froze. That was just what I decided to do, was like, if I don't move, then I'm good to go. So, kind of the same, like, I'm denying that I'm in any danger, and I'm just going to stand here and I'm not going to move, and that's fine.
Wow.
And I think it is very much like something that is similar to this. Again, not necessarily a trauma response, but just a
Well,
similar...
it kind of was. It was a fear response, which, I mean,
right.
Your body, your brain took that as trauma at the time.
Sure did.
Jordan mentioned something the other day, the same thing, that she said, so apparently I'm not a normal human. She said, you're supposed to have a fight or flight response, and I just freeze. Well, apparently it's a thing.
It is a thing. Very much, very much.
Fawn is like a possum playing dead. Sometimes it's done consciously. You're looking for an escape. Sometimes it's unconscious. This makes me think of those cute little goats that when you run up and scare them, they go stiff and fall over. Have you seen that?
Yeah,
they are the cutest things. You scare them and they're like thunk. That's a fawn.
Oh, what a poor baby.
You might take a beating knowing the abuser will pass out, and then they'll be able to be safe or free. It's that play dead syndrome.
I didn't really think about, the fawn response before. I'd never really heard of it.
I had never heard of it.
But I think I kind of write Louie that way, with Oris. She kind of has the fawn response. Like she just waits
it out.
Yeah, she's not really trying to, I mean, she is now, but like she wasn't really trying to, get away from it. What she has to go through with Oris. She's just kind of like, well, he'll be over it eventually. And
it is what it is. It's like in my book with Trick, the demon hunters. River, her mentor dude, beats her all the time. And she just is like, well, it'll stop eventually.
Yeah.
And she does that fawn response. She doesn't fight back. She doesn't, she doesn't freeze. She just waits for it to be over.
Yep. Interesting.
Yeah. So in urban fantasy, it not just lends itself to the types of traumas in every other type of book, but it has even more that you can do with it because of the type of book it is.
Right.
Magical trauma. Like, I was thinking of Magic Bites, the Alana Andrews series. Now, that trauma happened a long time ago where the magic and the technology collided. But think if that book had been written when that happened, that would be a huge trauma.
Honestly, I think that'd be really fun to see. I would love to see a book where
they need to write the prequel. Yeah.
Yeah.
You okay?
Sorry. Yep. Give me a second. I think I swallowed wrong last time I took a sip.
You're not supposed to inhale alcohol,
but it diffuses through the blood faster that way.
That's true.
But you were talking about magical trauma, and I can just imagine all kinds of ways that magic could be traumatic.
Yeah.
And it often is in urban fantasy novels. I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it, is kind of almost the point, where like magic is a bit traumatic and it changes the way that people, live their lives. And it is the strange element in this genre. Magic is the element that makes urban fantasy. And so obviously that's going to come with the plot line and the things that happen to our main characters. And think about your Half Dead novel that you've talked about recently.
Yeah, I forgot about that, but
that's some trauma.
Definitely trauma. Death is trauma.
Yeah.
Creature trauma. You've got werewolves. You might be attacked by a werewolf. You might be kidnapped by the fae. All kinds of things.
Yeah, for sure. Again, it makes me think of the Patricia Brigg novels.
Mhm.
She really puts her characters through the ringer. They've been attacked by werewolves, they've been changed by werewolves, they've been
Mhm.
kidnapped by fae, they've been attacked by fae. All kinds of stuff happens in her books, and they're extremely well done.
Oh yeah, definitely. I guess she would be a great one to go and study if you want to go
Absolutely.
and study how to deal with trauma in your novels.
Absolutely.
Because in urban fantasy, the world is so fantastical. I'm not sure if that's a word or not, but you can pile on the trauma to your characters in ways that aren't normal for other genres.
100%. But I also think it's important to remember that, like, the quote unquote normal ways to have your character have a trauma may also highlight the humanity of your characters in such a fantastical world.
That's a good point. That's a
Yeah, I
really
was just
good point.
thinking about it. I think, it's a good way to show that your characters are still, quote unquote
Human.
human.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, that makes me think of Buffy.
Yeah.
Buffy
Oh,
had a lot of
yeah.
trauma that she had to experience, especially for a kid. She was
Yeah.
a teenager.
Yeah.
But that might be a good, any excuse to go pull out Buffy and watch Buffy is good for me. But that
You
might
have
be a,
immediately made me want to watch it again. Thank
yeah,
you.
but that might be a great one to study to see how all the different trauma was handled and how a teenager did
Super,
it.
super good one. Yeah, it makes me think of the episode where her mom died.
Hmm.
The acting in it was superb, and the writing of that trauma response was really well done, I think.
I think so too. And then Charmed, the old Charmed. I haven't
Yes.
watched all the new Charmed yet, so I don't know what it's got going on. But the old Charmed, Piper, that poor girl, she had a tendency to date like killers.
She really did. Well, that, and then like ghosts,
Ghost.
and
She fell in love with Ghost. Yeah.
and yeah, just wow.
And then, of course, they had all just lost their grandmother at the beginning of the series, and they
Right.
had lost their mom at a young age. Their dad had left them.
Yeah. And those things played such a role in the way that they lived their lives from then
Mhm.
on. Throughout the entire series, their grandmother and their mother, their deaths affected them in the way that they lived their lives. There was a whole episode about Prue, dealing with their mother's death, and how she had drowned at the lake, and all
Well,
that kind of stuff.
and Phoebe, her dealing with the leaving of the father, she never got, she handled that so much differently than Prue did, and yet the mother's death didn't affect Phoebe as much because she didn't never know her.
Right.
She was so young when she died, she didn't have the trauma that Prue had.
Although that had its own, brought its own issues
Consequence,
along
yeah.
as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the Fever series, it starts
Mhm.
off with the trauma of the main character losing her sister, but another book that has lots of sadistic things thrown at our main character. So many
Yeah.
other
Poor
traumas,
Mac.
yeah, through that.
Poor Mac. And Karen Monning made a point to tell her readers, her audience, that while the story is dark, like, it is a dark story, there are a lot of horrible things that happen to poor Mac. There is
Hmm.
a light in the end, and that's kind of the point of her story. So maybe that's important to you as an author as well.
Hmm.
Traumatic events don't have to mean end all be all for your characters, of course.
Yeah,
there is light at the end of the tunnel. So
definitely. It could be the overcoming, it could be part of your character arc. It could be, it could be the acceptance of living with that darkness too. Courtney likes that kind of
yeah.
I like the happy endings where, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but Courtney is fine with the darkness becoming accepted and living with it.
I am too, depending on the story. I
Well,
think,
Katniss in
yeah, good books.
yeah, good,
Yeah,
very good books, and that end was, you know,
sad. It had a
yes,
darker ending. I
it
mean,
did. It was
she ended up okay, but
right,
like,
but her traumas that that's another book with a whole bunch of traumas in it. Holy cow.
oh, and it's
Um,
good. It's a good
it's
one.
very good, but yeah, it wasn't, oh, she became leader of the world,
Right, right.
she accepted what was,
Mm-hmm.
which is an interesting way to see how, and that is real life too.
It sure is. I think for that one, it's important to know your genre and the way that you tell your story. But
Hmm.
you're your own author. You guys know your stories.
Yeah.
So
No, that's all I've got.
That is also all I have, except for my usual interview question sentence challenge.
Okay.
So for my interview question, have you utilized traumas in your novels? And I think we talked a little bit about it as we
all the
yabbered
time.
on. Yeah.
We do, both of us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I can't even pinpoint poor Beck and frickin' fairies. Her life as a normal little bookstore owner just goes woo
Yeah.
down, you know,
Yeah.
trauma after trauma after trauma.
Absolutely. I think
And
Kata, her being tossed into a brand new world,
mhm,
she's constantly having to play catch up and,
mhm.
being attacked by things that she has no idea what they're capable of. Also,
The thing I like about Beck is that even with all the trauma that I threw at her, she somehow manages to stay positive.
yeah.
She is
Yeah.
a person who always looks to the bright side or tries to.
Right. Yeah.
Um, Kata is more, I don't even know. She's definitely not an optimist.
No.
She kind of goes with the flow on that one, but you're right. I threw all kinds of stuff out. I think all writers do.
Oh, 100%. And it was less of like a do you use, trauma in your novels and, just more of a question to get you talking about it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What I mean, all your books too.
I'm really mean to my characters. I think
Yeah.
I give them a lot of stuff to work through. I've
Louis.
got
Oh my Lord.
poor Louie has a lot to work through. And she's got Delaney to help her out.
Mm-hmm.
Delaney has her own issues by the end of, book one. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I attack her in the first chapter of the book. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, my cat just decided he didn't want my door to be covered by a curtain. So I will have to fix that in a second. But Aiden, she loses her sister on the first page.
Mm-hmm.
Mac is tossed into being in the spotlight as the only magical person known to the world as of yet.
Well, and it was trauma that she killed that person.
Oh, that's right. I did do that to her. Wow, I was so rude. It's
Yeah.
been a while since I've read that one.
I mean, she didn't want to do that. That just, and the trauma that she suffered from the feelings that she had because of what she had to do.
I legitimately forgot that I made her do that. That's unfortunate for her.
I love writers. We're all a crazy bunch of people.
Listen, I have a lot of people talking in my head. Mac hasn't in a long time. So
yeah.
Good grief. But yeah, no, definitely lots of trauma there in my novels.
Okay.
I do have a sentence challenge for you guys who are interested in participating. So basically take this sentence that I'm about to give you and use it in a piece of work. I typically do one page just to legitimately challenge myself into getting a story through in that little space. And so this week's challenge is you have no idea what I've been through.
It's a good one. Very apt.
Very apt. I try to keep them a little bit relevant to the topic of the day. So.
Yes. Can you do the outro?
Oh, I can try. Thank you guys so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Sorry we were late on this one and didn't have an episode for you guys last week. Come and follow us on our social media. We did post there that we weren't going to be having an episode last week or that we were late. So we try to keep you guys a bit up to date on what is going on if we're not posting episodes. You can find us on pretty much any form of social media. So we have a Facebook, a Pinterest, an Instagram, Twitter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can find all of those links at or on our website at eatdrinkwritepodcast.com. I think that's right. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think so.
And the best way to get in touch with us, oh God, the best way to get in touch with us is through our email. So eat.drink.write.podcast@gmail.com.
Yes.
And we just super appreciate we appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. And yeah.
We'll love to hear from you. Any topics you want us to talk about. Anything?
I should write down this outro.
I know. Me too. I always mean to. And then I'm like, we're sitting here talking. I'm like, oh, we're done.
We need an outro.
We have to have an outro.
Maybe it sounds more organic if I just spew a bunch of words at people.
All right, guys. Well, thank you all for listening. Did you say anything about our Patreon?
No, we have a Patreon. Yeah. Please come support us at our Patreon. We've got a few extra goodies there for those of you who are supporters. That is patreon.com/EDW podcast.
Yes.
And we would really appreciate the support. We love doing this for you guys.
Definitely. All right. We will see you next week.
See you next week.